Everyone, welcome. Again, I am excited to be with you today to talk about informal formative assessment practices. So there are three things that by the end of the webinar today that I'd like to have covered with you and given you some new information about the informal practices. First is just taking a look at what is formative assessment? What is the process? It's not just a thing, but what is that process called formative assessment? What does that mean to us as educators? And then we'll talk about several different informal formative assessment practices, and then we'll talk just a little bit about collecting information and recording data connected to the informal practices. So let's start with what is formative assessment. Let's get a handle on that so that we're coming from a common level of understanding. I like this definition by Dr. Jim Popham. Dr. Popham is an author and well-known educator in this field of assessment. And he says that assessment is a planned process in which assessment elicited evidence of student status is used by teachers to adjust their ongoing instructional procedures or by students to adjust their current learning tactics. That's a mouthful. Let's break that down a little bit. First, he says it's a planned process. Absolutely, it's done with purpose. It's not just something done accidentally, although when we talk about informal practices, they can be done very frequently at any time. So first part, it's a planned process. And then what do we do with that planned process? Well, we look for evidence of student status. So where are students in the learning that we have just supplied to them or had them engaged in? And why do we have that? Why do we want that status? First, to adjust our practices as teachers, certainly, so that we can meet the needs of students in a better and more efficient way. And then also by students, so that students know where they are, what they're doing, and how to move forward. So formative assessment, a process in which we assess students to adjust our practices and for them to know more about where they are and where they need to go to increase their educational or instructional understanding. So why do we assess? Well, there are several reasons, and there's just a few that I'd like to point out to you. One, certainly a main one, is that we want to gain a clear picture of students' understanding and their application of knowledge and skills. What do they know? What do they not understand? And can they apply what they've understood? And then we want to, of course, compare the performance of the students with the expectations that we have for them. So what exactly is it that we've intended for them to learn? What standards are we teaching? What learning targets might we have? Whatever we call it, what was the intent of the lesson that we had so that we can compare where the student is currently understanding and performing to where we expect them to be so that we can provide them feedback and they can provide us feedback as to where they are and where they need to go next. Evaluate the effectiveness of teaching strategies. This is for all assessment. It's for summative assessment. It's for formative assessment and certainly for informal practices as well. We want to know if the strategies that we're doing worked with that student for this point in time. We all know that as teachers we need dozens and dozens and dozens of strategies, and the one strategy that works in 1 year may not work the next year. We need to be able to change it up and know what's having a positive effect on students and what we maybe need to tweak in order to get a better level of effect. We also need, of course, then to recognize the challenge areas and adjust our instruction accordingly. If for some reason students are not understanding something in a way that we're doing it, in a way that we're performing it, we need to change that up and adjust on the fly even so that we know and they know that they can truly perform and reach the expectations that we have for them. One of the pieces that I think we often forget is that we also want to celebrate and learn from successes. In an informal setting, which we'll talk about in just a moment, celebrations can come very quickly. We can know very instantly what students know and don't know. We can have comments from them or encouragement from them to say, hey, we are doing a good job here. This is our solid foundation. This is what we know. This is what we need to know. And this is how we get to the next level of success. So formatively assess. If we talk about all those reasons for assessment, why do we formatively assess? Well, formative assessment is about frequent monitoring of student progress. And again, why would we do that? Well, we want to be able to adjust instruction so that we meet student needs. Without that feedback from the students back to us, we have a certain degree of understanding of what they know and don't know, but through formative assessment, we can have a much greater degree of understanding. It also assists students in reflecting and having them really evaluate their understanding, their feelings about their current status. They need to take a look at themselves and say, well, what do I know? What do I not know? How confident am I in the material that's being presented and in the things that I'm being asked to do? Another piece then, of course, is to help students go to that next level of success. And how we do that is by, again, getting feedback from them, getting information from them through formative assessment so that we can adjust and make a difference. So what are informal formative assessment practices? Well, they are those instant or near instant practices that we can use to get information on the current status of students so that instantly in the classroom we can respond. We can adjust either during the class, we can adjust throughout the class, we can adjust before the next class, depending on the types of tools that we're using. In some cases, the tools can be used multiple times during the class. I noticed that when you logged in or when you took the poll earlier that we have several different roles of people attending today. We have teachers, we have administrators, we have content-related people, we have support people. We have a variety of different roles. No matter what your role in the school or district that you are in, informal practices can be used with children, they can be used with adults. We're talking about practices here that can be used early childhood through high school. Some are more appropriate than others, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Now, why would we want the assessment, the informal practices are done the same as the reasons for the same as any other assessment. That is why we do them. We want that instant feedback. We want the information so that we can adjust practices. The purpose, though, is that they do provide us that instant information, which is different than summative assessment or some of the more formalized formative assessment practices that we might have. So let's talk for a little bit here about formative assessment, the process of itself. There are basically 5 steps to any assessment process. That first step is what's our target? What is it that we're trying to teach? And for that purpose, we rely on our standards. We take a look to say, what is it that we're teaching? What's the content that we're teaching? How are we going to teach it? And what are our outcomes? What specifically do we want students learn by the end of this period of time, this class period, for example? The next step then is to say, okay, let's determine what kind of assessment we want to give and for what purpose. Well, today we're talking about informal practices, so we'll deal strictly with informal practices. The third step then is to go ahead and implement that assessment or that informal assessment practice and gather the data. Much of the data that we'll be talking about today will actually be visual data, and then we're going to evaluate it. Evaluating meaning we're going to respond to it. What do we do to take what the students are showing us or telling us and then respond to make a difference? We take a look at examine the strengths and challenges based on that data. So what are we seeing that is a real positive? What's telling us that we can move on? What challenge areas might we have? This might be with individual students within a classroom, a small group. It might be with an entire concept that we're teaching. And then what do? Well, we create and implement a plan to close the gap. Well, within an informal process, this happens all within sometimes seconds. It's not a long process. It's something that mechanically we do very, very quickly. So if we take a look at what some of those informal tools are, I want to give you just a few seconds here to look through this list. We're going to be talking about 22 different ones today. And I think if you look at the list, you're going to see some that you probably have used or talked about before. So the intent now is to go through each of these. I'll explain what it is that they are. Please, while I'm explaining, reflect on how you can use them in your classrooms if you have not yet used them, how you do use them, or how you might even expand the use if you already use these types of practices. The information that can be gleaned from the practices that we're talking about it will make a difference in the classroom because of the responses that we can give to students on an ongoing and instant basis. So when we talk about FIST to 5, several of the strategies that we'll be talking about today deal with using the hands in a way that give teachers feedback. If I want feedback at the time that I'm teaching something in the lesson and I'm not quite sure, we see the students drift a little bit or their eyes or faces look a little bit more concerned, FIST to 5 is a great tool to use. So students are asked to raise their hand or the number of fingers that they have that reflect their depth of understanding or degree of confidence in what we just learned, in what we were just talking about. So if they're raising 5 fingers, that means I am with you. I know everything that you're talking about. I am so on top of this situation, I could probably teach it with you. If they raise a fist, that means, oh gee, I really don't, I'm lost. I don't know what you're talking about. Any place then from 1 through 5 gives that higher degree of confidence to say, all the way up to 5, I know what we're talking about. I can do this. So for example, we just finished reviewing how to find the area of a rectangular prism. Tell me with a FIST to 5, how confident are you that if you were asked to find the area of this box, for example, that you might be able to do that on your own? What that tells me then as a teacher is, do I need to review? Do I need to possibly give them a little bit of extra practice, maybe giving them a group task to do if they're not yet confident enough to try to do it on their own? Now, you might have mixed response in the classroom where some are very, very confident and others just are just uncomfortable. So what I might do then is go to that small group, get them together, do a little bit of reteaching with them where the rest of the class can move on. As far as the grade levels that this can be used in, it can be used actually from kindergarten all the way up. Anytime that an instant response is needed, you feel that students are drifting, ask them the FIST to 5 how confident they are, or when you're about to give an assignment of some type or a group assignment that they might be working on, get that degree of confidence out in the open so that you can respond to it and you have a really good then chance at success. Another way this can be used is after giving a set of directions. I just gave you 3 directions, for example, FIST to 5. How many of you feel right now that if I asked you to, you could name all 3 of those directions? So, one example of what we can do is FIST to 5. Let's move on. This is one of the ones that is one of my personal favorites. Why am I wrong? In teaching students, sometimes I think that they like when the teacher says, you know, I'm wrong here, but I just don't know why. So what happens in this situation is we present students with after working on a skill or a concept or after having a discussion in a certain content area and information is given, students are given some information that they are asked to either agree or disagree with and then support their answer. So if I were teaching math, for example, it might be giving a certain type of math problem with an incorrect response, maybe a response that could look logical or is a common misconception of way of doing things, but indeed it is inaccurate. Then students are asked in a very short amount of time to take a look at that response to find out why it is incorrect or correct and explain their answer. Now, in any of the assessment tools that we're talking about, these simple tools, it's a good idea at the end of this type, especially like why am I wrong, to have a few students give their answers orally. What that does then is have the teacher understand where the group basically is. It gets a group discussion going, and it will solidify whether students truly understand the concept or not. So again, in why am I wrong, another way of using it is in actually a more of a standardized test format where you're looking at multiple choice or true false and saying to the students, if this problem or if this is an incorrect answer, why is it incorrect? Tell me how it could be made to be accurate. It gives us again the information that students understand or don't understand what it is that we're doing. Index card response. I believe probably many of you use this type of thing as an exit card. Index card responses, students are asked to do questions or respond to a question about the day. So as an example, students might be asked to write down 2 key things that they learned that day. One big idea from the day. What's the big idea? One of the most important things that came out of this class. If we're in a science class and we're learning about plants, what is one really important thing that we need to know about survival of plants? Or in any topic, what is the main concepts that were the targets for the day, the things that you wanted to make sure that students understood. In an index card response, then, what can happen is the students provide those cards to you. You can flip through them quite quickly to see they understood those key concepts, or gee, there's some missing. If there's some missing, what you can do then is review those with the class to say, these are the things that I saw on the cards, these are really important, these are some other things that I want to make sure that you know and understand. Now in index card responses, it might be done during the class, or it might be more of an exit slip on the way out of a class or at the end of a class where the teacher collects these to prepare for the next day. Another way index card responses can be used are as reminders of the previous day. So you could start a class with this informal type of assessment, an index card response saying, what are the 3 main things we learned about in class yesterday? Or can you give me a solution to this type of problem? The index card response is used at grade levels that obviously are writers. So typically simple sentences, first grade on up. They're used very successfully with upper grades. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs to the side. Quick check of understanding, very similar to fist to 5. If you are with me, please raise your thumb. If you're a little bit confused about some of the things that we're talking about, put your thumb to the side. If there is major confusion, you can't go on, put your thumb down. Now, one of the things that I would suggest to you about any hand signal is that I think we all know that students have a tendency to look around the room. What are other students doing? I don't want them to look at me. I don't want them to criticize the position of my thumb. So what I would suggest you do is that the thumbs, the hand, no matter what that hand signal, is right in front of the chest. If it's right in front of the chest, no other student in the room can see it. If students are facing in the same direction, you can easily see it. If they're not facing the same direction, quickly walk around the room to see where those thumbs are. Again, it depends on the lesson that you're doing as to what that question might be. You know what your targets are, so you want to ask a question about those key targets. Again, it could be about a set of directions you're giving. Thumbs up, you're with me, you understand your next step, who you're going to be working with. Thumbs to the side, you're not sure. Thumbs down is you definitely need a repeat. So, thumbs up is another informal assessment tool. Ticket out. In a ticket out situation, it's again, students end it at the end of a class. These can be used for reflections on the part of the student, because the student has to, in their mind, review what's happened in class. They have to think about, okay, so what happened in that last 40 minutes? What happened in the last 45 minutes? They have to reflect on their level of understanding and know what it is that they can and can't do connected to the things that they're being asked to do. The number of questions in a ticket out varies depending on the grade level of the student. In an early grade, it might be 1 or 2 questions. It might be, it might be one key idea from class today. One thing I need a little bit more information on. One piece of assistance that I might need from the teacher. One thing that I really know well, I could do this very well and I can teach somebody else. So I might be asking questions, or I might be asking thoughts about how students are doing. Again, what we want to make sure that we do is that we review the responses, because if we talk about, again, that formative assessment cycle or the assessment cycle, we provide that assessment, and then the important part is how do we use the results. So as we flip through these results, we make sure that the questions we ask on the ticket out are information that's important to us to know what our next steps are. As we take a look at our next steps then, we review the ticket out that the students have done. In some cases, we might want to, if the students have not left the classroom, we might want to read some of those responses aloud or review them overnight and make sure then that they are addressed the next day so that if there are any misconceptions, we can clear them up. If there are any strengths, we can celebrate those strengths. Boy, students, it really sounds like you absolutely understood the impacts or the impacts or causes of the Civil War, for example, and how that impacted the rest of the war. Or it might be you really understand the difference between different types of environments that animals live in and what animals need to survive. Whatever that happens to be, you've asked questions that you really want students to know and match your learning targets very well. Headline. Headline is a very quick tool, and it's great when you want students to summarize information. It's a way to get them to summarize what they've learned without actually saying, write a summary. And in some cases, they understand a headline more than they would the summary. So in the case of headline news or headline, what we're asking students to do is to decide very quickly on key concepts, again, that were taught. They should be able to relate these to those learning targets that you had for class, those standards that you were teaching, so that they can come up with a 3 to 5 to 7 word headline that says, this is key for the class today. If you want to go beyond that, another thing that can be done then is for students to come up with a sentence, and it's a one-sentence newspaper. And in that newspaper, they answer the questions that make most sense connected to the class that you had, the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. How do you know that this is the correct answer? When and where is this most likely to happen? Why would a character do what they did in the story that you just read? That headline news helps them answer those questions and do it in a brief and responsive way, so that they can actually illustrate to you what it is they understand. And by reading these, then you understand also not only what they're clear on, but what they're not clear on. Inside-outside circle. It's kind of a fun thing to do, especially if you see that your students need movement. If they are a little bit antsy, if in Wisconsin there's been several days that are far below zero, and we've had some times where students have not been able to go outside at all during the day. So inside-outside circle is a really nice reflective tool and a tool for informal assessment. What happens in inside-outside circle is that we have 2 circles in the classroom. One, the outer circle of students face the inside of the circle. The inside circle faces the outside. So if you can imagine, I'm on the inside of the circle, I am face to face with the person on the outside of the circle. What we do then is, as teachers, is we give them something that they're going to either talk about briefly, or they're going to maybe just state a fact or state a key idea of something that they just learned. So I am facing student 1. I say my key idea, the student across from me states their key idea, and then we shift. The outside circle, well, one of the circles moves in a certain direction. So let's say the outside circle moves to the right. I now have a new pair. So I don't say the same thing if I can avoid it. I say something new. What else do I know from class today? What else do I know how to do? And the other student, again, gives me some new information. So I might do that and shift students 3 to 5 to 7 times. You can tell by listening to what's going on when you need to cut that off, when enough is enough. By listening to what the students are talking about, then it gives them the reinforcement of reflecting on what they know and don't understand from the class. It gives them a review of what happened from the students across from them. And by listening to them, it also gives you a very clear understanding about, as a whole, what the class knows and what the class is having struggles with. Observation is simply walking around the room and observing, but it's it's such a powerful practice. I put a little bit of an extra piece in here, though. If we're going to observe the classroom, I do suggest that we keep track of data. So how do we do that? We can simply take a computer with us, a sheet of paper with us with the student names on, and next to their name, record just a plus or a minus or some other symbol that you might use when they're working with groups or when they're working independently on did they understand or did they not? Did they have a solid foundation of what they needed to in order to begin some kind of exercise that you're having them do, or do they need additional support? Now, obviously, if you end up putting down a minus, you're also going to stop and have a conversation with that student or that group to get them onto the right track. But the reason that you want to keep track of it by recording what it is that they're learning that day, so that's on the sheet as well. And then you can keep track of, is this a student who's consistently having problem? Is it certain days of the week? Is it certain times of the day? Because in doing that, then you can adjust to and meet the needs of that student at a greater level. Sometimes we think without doing this type of thing that it's always the same students. The student is always struggling. By keeping records like this, what I have found is that it's not always the same student. Some students obviously struggle, and they struggle more often than others. But there are good days, there are bad days, and keeping track of this helps quite a bit. ABC summaries. ABC summaries are also a reflective and an informal formative assessment tool. In this case, what we do with ABC summaries is give the students a letter of the alphabet. So I might go through the room, skip some tough letters, but I'll just say your A, your B, your C, your D, and go on through all of the letters for the class that I have, or I might repeat some letters. But their job then is to select a word or a phrase that starts with that letter that talks about key ideas from the class. So if I have an A, my ID needs to start with an A. Atmosphere is important in this way if it's in a science class. Whatever the letter is, it needs to have a key connection with the class. Now what this does again is have the students review what it is that they learned in class. It has them do a little bit of creative thinking with how am I going to fit this letter of the alphabet into the class that we had today. Now with students who struggle, or the first times we might do this, we could partner up. So with your partner, determine what your B statement will be, or what your D statement will be, or your J, or whatever letter it is. Now in doing this then, students verbalize these. If you don't have a lot of time, typically for this type of informal assessment, 2 to 3 minutes is enough to go through several students. So you ask several students to give their answers to the rest of the class. And in doing that then, the entire class hears what students are thinking. You're aware of any misconceptions that are happening. You're also aware of what they're solid in and what you have not heard yet that was one of your key learning targets. If there's something that you don't hear, you know that you need to either review it the next day or possibly give some information to the students right away. Whiteboard response, this used to be a chalkboard response. It can be a white paper response. But here again, it's instant feedback for the teachers. So what students would have is a small whiteboard in front of them or some other tool that they can write on, so that occasionally you ask a question and you say, okay, whiteboard response, and students take their marker, their pencil, their pen, their crayon, whatever it happens to be, and respond to the question you have. That could be a math problem, it could be writing a sentence, it could be anything it could be listing 3 things that are important to the survival of a species. It could be anything that you want it to be. Again, whiteboard response can be anyone from an age that can write on up. In elementary grade, early elementary, kindergarten even, whiteboard response could include smiley face if you understand what's happening, draw me a quick picture of this, so you can still use the whiteboard response. Now, typically what I would do with the whiteboard response is say to the students, I want you to keep that whiteboard down until I say go, and then everybody's going to hold it up at the same time. In holding it up at the same time and reviewing the room quickly, then you can see where there's confusion and where there's not, and respond to it accordingly. Red light, green light is such an easy practice, and it gives us instant clues as to what's happening in the classroom at the time. So with red light, green light, there's several ways to do it. I think one of the easiest ways that I find is having the students have 3 circles at their desk. One of red construction paper or red copy paper, one of yellow, and one of green. Now when we start a class, if we're talking about individual students, we want the green to be on top. They're not confused yet. They know what's happening. And green means, I'm with you, teacher. I know what you're talking about. I'm ready to learn, and I am with it. This can also happen if they're working in groups. So green on top means we get it. We're okay. At any point in time, if the student is starting to get a little confused, they can move their yellow circle to the top. That indicates to you that we're starting to have some kind of confusion. Maybe slow down, or just kind of watch me, or watch the group that yellow circle is coming onto. When red appears, it means I don't get it. If you keep talking, teacher, I'm not going to be able to understand. Please slow down. I need your help right away. So in groups in the classroom, if you have students working in groups, one of the students can be in charge of the red, green, and yellow. And that student flips to yellow when they say, we don't need your help yet, but just keep an eye on us. We're struggling a little bit. Green means leave us alone. We're on the right track. Red means if you don't come over here right away and help us out, or someone helps us out, we are at a standstill. So red light, green light, great tool, easy tool. The great thing about all of the informal assessment tools is they don't cost any money, and they are so easy to do that they really don't cost any time either. Wraparound is simply, again, when you want students to get up, move around, they are appearing a little bit more anxious, or they just need some movement. Wrap around the room means basically they're going to wrap around the room. Now that might be in a giant circle, it might be in a snake shape where they're wrapping between desks or between tables. But the goal is to get them up and moving, and then again having them share some key point from class. So that might be a question that you prompt them with about the content that you just had. It might be sharing a key idea. Whatever you decide is important at that point in time. With a wraparound, typically what I will ask students to do is give that response, that important thing that they learned or that thing that they feel really solid in. They have the ability to pass. They have the ability to repeat, because we wouldn't at any time want to embarrass any of the students, but at the same time we would encourage no repetition if possible. However, if somebody else had the same key idea that you did, feel free to repeat that. And if you're not sure what you want to say at this point, you can pass. So that's the wraparound strategy. Look and listen. I sometimes call this eavesdropping. It's one of my favorite ways to wander around the room. And basically the idea is this. Well, we're looking at one group. We're making sure that they're on track. We're making sure that they're understanding. But at the same time, we're listening to the group of students behind us. What are they talking about? Do they understand the concepts? Is there confusion? So basically it's looking in front and behind you all at the same time, just to gather information about the students during that wandering time. Do they get it? Do they not get it? Do certain groups need my attention, or can I move around? 3 questions. 3 questions can be anything that you want to ask them. These happen to be my favorite. So prior to the end of the class, we're going to ask the students to either write or share their answers to 3 questions. What did you learn today in this class or in this subject? What did you like about the way you learned it or what you learned? You can take that in either direction. The reason that I like to do that is I like the response from students. If they enjoy what they're doing, I believe that there's been experience where they remember it longer, they're more likely to be engaged in it, they're more likely to be anxious to come back to that class tomorrow because they want to do a good job, they're anxious to learn the material or the concepts that we're teaching them. And then the third question, do I have any questions? What are my questions? What do I not understand? Now with 3 questions, what I would typically say to the students is they certainly have to answer the first one and the second one. If they don't have something that they like, I ask them to make a comment about the class. They might not have questions. They might be understanding very well and not have any questions to ask you. You could also ask them to connect their learning to something that they learned previously. So if it's learning that's been taking place over a period of time, how did what you learned today connect to what we learned last week? So that's another piece that you can do with 3 questions. Triads, we're getting students in groups of 3, basically, and in that group of 3, we're going to give them a problem to talk about, or we're going to ask them to create a sentence, or we're going to ask them to look at something that we've done and create a response about it. They work together to agree on that response. We number them 1, 2, and 3. Each student has a number, and then randomly, in order to get that information out to the class, we'll say, okay, group over here in the corner, number 2, give us your response. The group over here in the center of the room, number 3, person number 3, can you tell us what you did and how you solved this response or how you solved this problem? And in that way, what we're doing again is engaging the students with other children in the room or students in the room, but we're also getting that formative feedback instantly about do they understand, do they not understand, and again, where do we go from here? Got a minute. Got a minute really means got a minute. This should be done in 1 minute. So what we might want to do here is pose a problem or ask the students a question and then give them 1 minute to, if they are at an age where they're writing, write a response. Or if they're at a point where they are more thinking, give them a minute to think of their response. So what we want them to be able to do in that got a minute is to apply the skills that they've learned from that class or from a series of classes into some kind of a 1 minute solution. This could be, in the next minute, could you please describe what I'm wearing in sentences? Or if we've been working on adjectives, could you, in the next minute, list as many adjectives as you can think of that describe things in the classroom? It's very, very flexible according to what it is that you're teaching. It can be used with adults by saying, can you quickly summarize the 3 key points that we just talked about in when we were discussing differentiation, or whatever it is that you are teaching at that moment. Can be used with kindergarten on up. With kindergarten sometimes, or early grades, you might even say, hey, you got 30 seconds. 30 seconds can be a long time. Back to that got a minute, I think if you haven't done this before, you might be very surprised as to how much students can actually accomplish in a minute. 1, 2, 3, please show me. Very similar to the fist to 5, very similar to the thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs to the side. And in this case, 1 finger if I know the topic being discussed, but little else. Like, I know we're talking about plants, but I really don't understand much of anything else that we're talking about. 2 fingers means that they understand the concept or process. 3 means that they really get it. They get it so well that they are ready to go out and teach others. They can do it on their own. So 1, 2, 3, please show me can be used again any grade level, anytime, actually throughout the class when you want to make sure that what you've just said they have a good handle on, or what they have just done, demonstrated to you, that they really are secure. Good thing to do if you're going to give any kind of homework, a fist to 5, a 1, 2, 3, or a thumbs up, thumbs down, to adjust or assess their level of security prior to giving an assignment that eventually they may need to finish on their own, because we want them to have a great degree of confidence that they'll be successful before we actually ask them to do something on their own. Agree, disagree. Thumbs up, thumbs down. This might be you showing them an answer of some type, a problem of some type, where they agree, disagree. Thumbs up means that they agree with that the answer is secure, that the answer is correct. Thumbs down means, nope, it's wrong. This can be done very quickly. For example, One quick thing that comes to mind is reviewing addition facts. So you might very quickly say 3 plus 2 is 6, thumbs up, thumbs down. 4 plus 8 is 12. 1 plus 3 is 4, whatever. Or multiplication facts, thumbs up, I agree, thumbs down, I don't. And in doing that, then you can assess, are they with you? Do they really understand what it is that you're saying for them or not? Causes of the Revolutionary War, mix them up. Say some that are, some that aren't. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Agree, disagree. Good way to pre-assess students as well. I, you, we. This is also a timed activity in which you give students about 30 seconds to think about what they've learned in class, think about those key concepts. And then they share with they partner up. Partner one. The I part is I think on my own. And then you and we, partner one shares for 30 seconds with partner number two, stating all of the things that they can do as a result of what they learned in class today, things that they know, things that they can do. After 30 seconds, teacher stops, says partner two, it's your turn. Partner two talks for 30 seconds, trying not to repeat anything that partner one says, and then those two partners confer. You want to come up with then a 1 to 2 sentence summary of their thoughts. That can be an oral summary. Then the teacher can say, okay, group one, can you share what your summary is? Group two, what's yours? Does anybody else in the room have anything different to share? And again, all the while we're assessing what they understood and what they didn't understand. Observational data, what I'm suggesting here is that as you talk to students, you simply record the fact that you talked to them. And in doing this, what it does is help us through the end of the week, those of you who are in high schools or those of you who are teaching several students at one time in the different areas. Sometimes we aren't able to say, who did we have that personal contact with? Contacting our students makes those connections with us. We want to do that, and I don't know about you, but I know for me, on Friday, I couldn't remember how many times I had talked to the different students in my classroom, especially when I was teaching 150 students at a time. So it's a good way to monitor that you have spoken with that student. Response data. One way of getting feedback from the students is having them record on a weekly basis and keeping track of even their own information. 3, today I really got it, I understood what was going on. 2, not so much. 1, I didn't get it. And over the weeks keep track of what works well with those students, what doesn't. Are we using a different strategy or not? Attitudinal data. It's a different type of informal assessment, but I think it's one that is great to use with students. This happens to be a survey that was given by a teacher to her class of 27 students. And these were things that this teacher felt were very important to ask the students if they were really going to engage in her class, and they were things that were important to her. So what she did then was keep track of the answers to these surveys, give it at the beginning of the year and then at the end of the year. So, for example, in this one, I can ask questions when I need to. Clearly, she wanted the students to usually or always be able to ask questions, yet 12 of them I just can't do it. This type of feedback says to me as teacher, I need to change some of my practices to be very much aware when students need to ask questions. The next chart slide simply shows what that data could look like if it were graphed. So again, the teacher can respond and say, wow, there's some stuff here that is going really well, and there's some other things I want to work on as a teacher to better meet my students' needs. So I think in any kind of informal assessment tool that you're going to use, and I'm sure that you have several others that you can think of or that you already use on a regular basis, basically what really makes the difference is our response to it. We can ask the students to do any types of those informal assessments that we have, but what we do, again, makes that difference. Analyzing the results very quickly in the classroom, responding to what it is that the students are showing us that they know, showing us that they don't know. And in some cases it might be, you know what, we know this, it's time to move on. So it's also a speed check for us. Let's speed it up. Let's do something. Let's go to the next step. And again, the informal assessment pieces can take seconds to minutes to maybe overnight, but not any longer than that. And yet they are extremely powerful. So in review of everything that we've talked about before we get to questions and answers, again, the assessment process for informal assessment, informal formative assessment is no different than it would be for assessment. We need to make sure that whatever questions we ask or whatever we ask the students to respond to in the informal setting basically very much connects to that target that we had in that class. What are the outcomes? What is it that we want students to know and be able to do by the end of this class? That's how we formulate our informal assessment. Then we go ahead and implement that. We gather the data and we respond to that data within seconds, within minutes, or within that class period. So in summary, the practices follow the same cycle. We've already talked about that. There are so many different ways to informally assess. We went through 22 of them in the last probably 40 minutes. Little or no preparation, so there really isn't a reason not to use them. Most of them can take seconds to maybe a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes tops. They can be used at all grade levels, and they can be used at different times during the day. They can also be used to get students up and about and moving. The reflection that students do as a result of the informal process is powerful. It makes them process what they've learned. It helps them know where their next steps need to be. It helps them know what help they need from you. And then also that they can be used absolutely multiple times within the same class period. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and see what type of questions we might have. Okay, we have a few different here. Is there a less expensive way to create a whiteboard instead of investing in one? Well, there are alternatives to whiteboards. One way that I have seen people make whiteboards is actually by going to a hardware store, Home Depot. In Wisconsin, we have a store called Menards. But stores that sell big sheets of basically shiny wall boards is what they're called. And you can cut them up and use them in the classroom. It's a much less expensive way. Another thing now is that there is whiteboard paint or wall paint that you can use to paint wood into making your own whiteboard, so that would be less expensive. Another way is to use sheets of paper. Eventually that does get cumbersome, but even if we can get paper donated from and use the blank side of sheets that were going to otherwise be thrown away. So that's a couple ideas on how you might want to use whiteboard. That came from Hannah. Mark asks, how, let's see, how do you determine how much to record and how often? I think one of the things that we need to do there when we're recording is to say what is going to give us the most useful information. So it depends on, again, on what we're doing and what we're trying to find out. If we're making sure that we've gotten to all of our students, I would say that a couple times a week is very helpful, at least 3 times a week. Daily if possible. Have we talked to our students individually? As far as what we're recording, I would go with days where it's a threshold day, where if they don't understand today, it's going to impact the rest of the week. Record what's happening so that you can reflect on it and say, hey, they've got it, we're fine, we can keep moving. Or, gee, this little group over here didn't. So how much, how often? I say simple is better. Easy recording can give you a really good picture. Color coding can help. But again, key times that really will make a difference as to the next steps that you have. Shelby asks, can I go over again why we assess? I think there are many reasons that we assess, but basically when we assess students, we have a clear idea on whether they're understanding what it is that we need them to understand. That's probably the key reason for assessment, because when we do something, when we talk to students, when we have them engage in activities, until we actually assess their understanding, we can't be completely sure that they've internalized what it is that they have and that they're ready for the next steps in their education. Can you repeat what is the wraparound idea? The wraparound is to have students get up, wrap around the room, basically stand around the room in some kind of a shape between desks, whatever, in an order, so that you can go around that wrap, go around that circle, and ask them, again, key ideas that they learned in class. You might ask them different questions. And in the wraparound, then, they either state an idea that they have, they can repeat an idea that's already been stated, or if they need to, they can pass. So the idea is to get that review out in the open so that students are all aware of those key points that were learned in class that day. And if you see anything or you don't hear things that you want to hear, then you can bring those up and reiterate those to students, with the students. Elizabeth asks us, do you use a timer? I could see some of these techniques taking the entire class period. I actually use a watch, and I make sure that they don't take too long. So when I'm talking about any of these ideas, we stop them after a minute or 2 minutes. The most I ever do them is 3 minutes. And in some cases, like the fist to 5, that's just seconds. The longest one would be that partner share piece where I'm deciding, I'm thinking for 30 seconds, I share with my partner for 30 seconds. That can even be cut down. It could be done down into 15 seconds, and then a minute for processing the idea. So I actually absolutely time them. The triad piece is when we get students into groups of 3, we number them. They are a number 1, a number 2, or number 3. We give them a problem to do or a process to evaluate. They have a certain amount of time to do it, 1 to 2 minutes. And then at that point in time, I can go around the room, pick out maybe 5 of my triads, maybe 2 or 3, depending on the time I have. And I say, person number 2 in this triad, please give me your response. Person number 3 in this triad, please give the class your response. The reason that students are numbered in the triads is because they don't know who's going to have to answer. Everyone really has to have a clear understanding of what it is that the group decided. And it gives multiple students an opportunity to answer questions. Monica asks, which formative assessment activities work best with middle schoolers? I believe that all of them here, actually I've worked on all of them with middle schoolers. They all work well. It depends on the date and the time. I think some of them that are more active, the inside-outside circle, are great when middle schoolers need to move around. We all know that they are a very different breed, and they do need that kind of movement. Wraparound is another good one. Middle schoolers like conversation, so when they can work in triads or when they can talk with a partner and do some of those partner-based activities, that really helps out there. But any of these could be done with middle schoolers. Inside-outside circle, same as fishbowl. Yes and no. I've seen fishbowl used similar to this, and I've seen fishbowl used in a very different way. So you might be using fishbowl in this way. Sometimes fishbowl is used with chairs in the center of the room where students go in and out to give responses. So it could be. And I believe the last question that I have is from Jim, who says, what grade level would inside-outside circle work best with? Would this be up to middle and high school? It even works with adults. So I don't think that there's a limit to the grade level that inside-outside circle works with. It is dependent, really, this one is does take a little bit more room, so you need to have room in your classroom to do it. Middle and high schoolers do like it because, again, they're talking to partners, but they also have to be very clear on what it is that they're saying. They want to make sure, especially at the high school level, that they are appearing very knowledgeable about the topic that they're sharing with the partner. And then they also get to talk to multiple people, which is a plus.